You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
Ashwood Lane was the perfect suburban cul-de-sac until 2-3 a.m. A blinding flash. Every electronic device dead. No power, no cell signal. A fog rolls in, sealing the neighborhood off from the world. Residents think it's a blackout. They're wrong. They've become test subjects in a rogue military experiment, Operation Icarus, a neural weapon designed to simulate a hostile invasion by hijacking the brain. What follows is pure psychological horror, paranoia, accusations, torture, murder, because when you think your neighbors have been replaced, the only enemy left is your own mind. And by the time help arrives, Ashwood Lane is silent, bloody, broken, forever changed. Subscribe to Soul Studios for more twisted, immersive horror stories that explore the darkest corners of human nature, where reality warps and terror is only one thought away. 2:03 a.m., Ashwood Lane slept under a thick blanket of summer heat. It was the quietest hour of night, when even the wind had ceased and the houses sat in perfect stillness. In the neat cul-de-sac, porch lights glowed faintly, illuminating trimmed lawns and parked cars. Everything was ordinary and calm, until a sudden white flash tore open the sky. The flash was blinding and absolute. For an instant, it turned night into day. Every house, every leaf on the oak trees lit up in stark white. Windows glared with harsh light. A dog began barking frantically, then yelped and fell silent. Just as abruptly as it came, the light vanished, plunging Ashwood Lane into darkness deeper than before. In that breathless silence, electronics died in unison. Street lamps fizzled out. Inside the houses, digital clocks blinked off and ceiling fans shuddered to a halt. Phones, tablets and televisions went black. Even the gentle hum of air conditioning stopped, leaving only a ringing absence in the ears of the waking residents. Paula Healy sat bolt upright in bed, heart pounding in her chest. She had been dreaming moments before, but now her eyes were wide, reflecting the after-image of that impossible light. Beside her, Dan, her husband, swore under his breath, fumbling for the lamp on the nightstand. He clicked it once, twice. Nothing. "Power's out," Dan muttered, voice thick with sleep and confusion. Paula's pulse raced. "What was that flash?" she whispered, throwing aside the covers. Her skin prickled with residual static. Lightning. It couldn't be. "No thunder," Dan said. He moved to the window and peeled back the curtain. The neighborhood beyond was completely dark. Not a single house light or street lamp glowed. The only illumination came from the moon, just a pale crescent, and the distant stars. Ashwood Lane lay in uncanny stillness. Across the street, a door opened. Paula saw their neighbor, Tom Kendrick, stepping out onto his porch in pajama pants and a t-shirt. He, too, looked bewildered, glancing up at the sky. Other houses stirred with movement as well, dark figures in windows and doorways. Paula grabbed her phone from the nightstand out of habit. Its screen remained black, refusing to turn on. She held the power button down repeatedly. Dead. Dan tapped his smartwatch, no response. A sinking feeling formed in Paula's stomach. This was no ordinary power outage. From Lily's room at the end of the hall came a small, scared voice. "Mommy?" Paula hurried down the hall, nearly tripping in the dark. She found her 8-year-old daughter standing in the middle of her pink bedroom, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Lily's eyes were huge with fear. "What happened?" Lily whimpered. She must have been awakened by the flash, too. Paula knelt and wrapped her daughter in a hug. "I don't know, honey," she said softly, trying to keep her own voice steady. "Maybe just a power surge or something. Did you see that big light?" Lily nodded against her shoulder. It was like the sun exploded. Dan appeared behind them with a heavy-duty flashlight he'd grabbed from the garage. He thumbed the switch, but no beam of light emerged. He smacked it against his palm and tried again. Still nothing. "The batteries should be fresh," he said, perplexed. Worry crept into his tone now. "It's okay," Paula said quickly, though unease was creeping into her. Nothing was working, not even battery-powered devices. She forced a smile for Lily. "Let's get some candles. Come on, stick close to me." Lily held her mother's hand tightly as the family made their way downstairs. In the living room, Paula fished a lighter from a drawer and lit 3 tall scented candles. The gentle flames cast wavering shadows on the walls, the familiar scent of vanilla doing little to calm her nerves. Outside, more neighbours were emerging despite the early hour. Murmurs echoed down the street, confused voices asking the same questions. What was that light? Do you have power? Is anyone's phone working? Dan opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, holding one candle out before him. Paula and Lily followed close behind, the damp summer air immediately clinging to their skin. The chorus of crickets that usually sang at night was strangely absent, as if the flash had silenced them too. "Tom!" Dan called softly across the street. The man on the porch turned to them. In the faint orange glow of Paula's candle, his face was pale and bewildered. "Your power out too?" Tom asked unnecessarily, voice hushed. He ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. "Everything's dead over here. Even my cell. I was up on the computer and it just died when that light hit." Paula exchanged a glance with Dan. She could see a few other neighbours stepping tentatively onto their lawns or peering from porches. The Wilcox couple from next door were huddled in robes at the foot of their driveway. Farther down, Mrs. Alvarez peeked out with a little oil lantern in hand that, judging by its steady flame, ran on lamp oil. "What the hell was that?" muttered Charlie Wilcox, pulling his robe tighter. "Transformer blowout? A meteor?" "No sound of an explosion?" Dan answered. He raised his voice slightly to address whoever was listening. "Maybe we should all meet in the street, make sure everyone's okay." Tom nodded. "I'll get whoever I can." He jogged toward another house, calling out names. Paula gently guided Lily down the porch steps. The grass felt cool and dewy under their bare feet. All around, neighbours converged toward the centre of the cul-de-sac. Faces loomed ghostly in the weak candlelight and the faint glow of Mrs. Alvarez's lantern. People spoke in nervous whispers that carried in the uncanny quiet. In that moment, the community's comforting normalcy had been stripped away. In its place was uneasy confusion. Above them the stars bore silent witness to the beginning of a long, long night. Neighbours gathered in the middle of the cul-de-sac, clustering in a tight circle of flickering candlelight. There were about a dozen people now. The Healeys, Paula, Dan and little Lily, the Wilcox couple, Tom Kendrick and his teenage son Evan, Mrs. Alvarez, and a few others emerging barefoot onto the asphalt. All faces were drawn and anxious, eyes darting up at the sky and around as if expecting the world to right itself any moment. "My car won't start, and even my phone is dead," Richard Hale said, voice shaking. Others murmured in agreement. Tom ran a hand through his hair. "Could it have been some kind of EMP? But if it was a nuclear EMP, we'd have seen a blast or felt a shockwave." "No, there was no explosion or heat," Dan interjected calmly, though his own unease showed in the tightness of his jaw. "And an EMP that strong would knock out more than just our block. This seems localized." Charlie Wilcox cursed under his breath. "Localized? Why just our street? If a transformer blew, it wouldn't kill our cars and phones." The neighbours traded uneasy theories, a freak lightning-less storm, a city-wide power grid failure, maybe an earthquake. None made sense of all the details. Evan Kendrick held up a small drone with broken propellers. "I was flying this before bed, and it just fell out of the sky when everything shut off," he said shakily. "Scared my dog half to death." "Whatever it was, it fried everything electronic," Tom summarised grimly. "Phones, cars, gadgets, none of it works. We're totally cut off." A heavy silence followed those words. Cut off. In the year 2025, being suddenly and completely disconnected felt like being cast adrift on a dark ocean. From the far end of Ashwood Lane, a pale mist began to drift in, curling around the last house on the cul-de-sac. At first, only Lily noticed it. She tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, look." All heads turned as the mist thickened into fog, rolling in eerily fast. It was an unusual time and weather for fog. High summer, with no nearby lake or river. Yet here it was, a wall of grey vapour creeping along the pavement and snuffing out what little moonlight remained. "That's odd," murmured Richard, stepping forward to peer into the haze. "Is there a fire somewhere? It doesn't smell like smoke," said another neighbour. In fact, the fog had a damp electric smell like air after a thunderstorm. Tom's expression hardened. "Everyone back away from that. Stay together," he warned. His authoritative tone, relic of his army days, cut through the murmurs. People obeyed, retreating further into the circle of candlelight. The fog coiled at the entrance of Ashwood Lane, dense and unmoving. It formed an opaque curtain that sealed the cul-de-sac from the main road beyond. As they watched, it spread behind houses and between yards, enclosing the entire neighbourhood in a shroud. "This is impossible," Paula whispered, though only Dan and Lily stood close enough to hear. She squeezed her daughter's shoulder, trying to reassure them both. Charlie took a small flashlight from his robe pocket and clicked it uselessly. With a frustrated grunt, he approached the wall of fog. "I'm just going to see how far it goes," he announced. "It can't be thick all the way through." "Careful," his wife Susan hissed, clutching at his arm, but he gently shook her off. Charlie disappeared into the grey swirl as everyone held their breath. A few long seconds passed, only the shifting whisper of mist and the faint drip of condensation off leaves to break the silence. Suddenly, Charlie's figure re-emerged, startling several people. He stumbled out, eyes wide. I walked maybe 20 paces, couldn't see my hand in front of my face. It just keeps going. I nearly got lost coming back. His damp hair glistened with fog droplets. It's like a solid wall around us. The group erupted into anxious chatter. If the fog encircled them completely, how large was the affected area? Was it just their street or the whole town? Dan raised his hands, calling for calm. "All right, let's think this through. If this is some kind of freak event, help will come eventually. The best thing we can do is stay calm and stick together." He looked around at each neighbour in turn. "Does anyone have a radio? A battery-powered one?" "I have one," offered Mrs. Alvarez timidly. "A little transistor radio in my emergency kit. I'll go get it." She shuffled quickly toward her house. Tom accompanied her for safety, disappearing onto her porch and through the door. The others remained clustered, glancing nervously between the fog and one another. Lily pressed close to Paula. "Are we going to be okay?" she whispered. Paula hugged her daughter closer and managed a soothing reply she didn't quite believe. "We will, sweetie. Maybe it's just a weird weather thing or a power surge. I'm sure it'll be fixed soon." But even as she said it, her eyes stayed on that unnatural wall of mist. In her gut, she knew this was no simple outage. Moments later, Tom and Mrs. Alvarez returned. The older woman held a small portable radio with an antenna. She clicked it on. Miraculously, it had fresh AA batteries. A crackle of static sounded, and everyone sighed in relief at hearing something work. Tom slowly turned the tuner dial. Static, static, nothing but static. No music, no voices. He tried the emergency weather channel. Only hissing white noise greeted them. Not even the emergency broadcast. Charlie asked, voice thin with worry. Tom shook his head. "Nothing at all. If this were just a local power outage, we'd pick up some station or at least the NOAA signal." He hesitated, a grim look on his face. "It's like we're off the grid completely." The phrase hung in the cool air. Off the grid. Not on any map, not in any signal range. The neighbours looked at one another, fear creeping into their expressions. "We should get inside," Susan Wilcox urged tremulously. "It's so cold out here, and that fog. I don't want to be near it." "Agreed," Dan said. "Why don't we all gather at our place for now? It's central, and we have a gas stove for coffee or tea. Strength in numbers." There were murmurs of assent. Under normal circumstances, it would have been strange to cram half the neighbourhood into one home in the middle of the night, but nothing about tonight was normal. As a group clutching their dim lights, the residents of Ashwood Lane retreated from the cul-de-sac's centre. The fog pressed in behind them, sealing them off from whatever lay beyond. Unseen by any of them, high above in the sky, a faint pulsing beacon briefly winked, then went dark. Ashwood Lane was now a world unto itself, an island of fear and confusion afloat in an endless sea of mist and darkness. By candlelight and lantern glow, the neighbours of Ashwood Lane crowded into the Healy family's living room. They perched on couches and dining chairs dragged in from the kitchen, while a few stood or paced restlessly. The air was thick with the smell of vanilla from Paula's candles, mixed with nervous sweat and the faint gas scent from the stove where Dan was boiling water for instant coffee. No one wanted to be alone. In the dark hush of the house, even the smallest sounds made them flinch. The clink of a spoon against a mug, the creak of a floorboard as Tom shifted his weight. Lily sat wrapped in a blanket on her mother's lap, thumb in her mouth, eyes unblinking. Paula stroked her daughter's hair, heart aching with worry she struggled to hide. Mr. and Mrs. Wilcox huddled together on one end of the sofa. Tom and his son Evan sat on the carpet near Paula and Lily. Richard and Karen Hale stood by the front window, peering out between the curtains. Mrs. Alvarez quietly handed out bottles of water and granola bars from her emergency kit, though few had any appetite. As they talked in hushed voices about what to do, a sudden thump at the back door made everyone jump. Tom and Charlie exchanged a glance, then Tom went to check, gripping a fireplace poker just in case. He returned a minute later, shaking his head. "Nothing out there," he murmured, "just darkness and fog." "Probably just a stray cat knocking something over," Charlie muttered. Even so, their nerves wound tighter. They tried to focus on practical plans. It was decided that at first light they would split up and bring supplies to the Healy house. Food, flashlights, if they ever worked again, blankets, anything useful. In the meantime, they would wait out these strange hours of the night together. As the minutes ticked by in uneasy camaraderie, the Hales' toddler began to fuss, then to cry in his mother's arms. The shrill, tired wails set everyone's teeth on edge in the quiet room. Karen bounced and shushed her little boy, softly singing a lullaby. Eventually the toddler calmed, but the brief racket left the adults even more tense, hearts thumping. Only Richard remained by the window, staring into the gloom. Without turning, he whispered, "Did anyone just hear that?" "Hear what?" Paula asked from the armchair where she sat with Lily dozing against her. Richard kept his face toward the glass, brow furrowed. "A voice. I thought I heard someone out on the street." Everyone fell silent, straining their ears. Through the thick walls, only a faint, ringing emptiness pressed back. "I don't hear anything," Tom finally said. Richard slowly turned to the group, uncertainty in his eyes. "It was very faint. Could have been, I don't know, maybe my mind playing tricks, but I swear it said my name. From out there. Richard." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Paula felt a chill prickle her skin. Perhaps Richard had nodded off and imagined it. No one wanted to outright dismiss him, but it was easier to believe it a trick of the mind than accept that someone unseen might be calling from the fog by name. "Stress," Charlie muttered. "We're all on edge. Could have been the wind or something." The explanation hung in the air, unconvincing. Mrs. Alvarez wrung her hands. "My late husband was in the war," she said softly. "He once talked about weapons that could scramble your senses, make you hear things. Perhaps—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I'm probably talking nonsense." Evan's eyes widened. "Like brain weapons? I read about microwave devices that make you hear voices." He looked around nervously. "Do you think that flash could have been something like that?" "Oh, please," Charlie scoffed, though his voice wavered. "Who on earth would target Ashwood Lane with something like that? We're just a normal neighborhood." No one had an answer. The idea seemed absurd, yet everything about tonight was absurd. A heavy, unnatural tension coiled in each resident's chest, keeping every sense on high alert. In the silence, the faintest sounds pricked at them. The drip of a faucet in the kitchen, the rustle of someone shifting in their seat, and sometimes, maybe, just maybe, a distant whisper that no one could be sure was real. They huddled together through the remaining hours of darkness, waiting anxiously for dawn. At one point, little Lily whispered to her mother, "Mommy, I'm scared." Paula hugged her close and murmured, "Me too, baby. Me too." None of them slept. The night seemed to stretch on without end. A dim grey light finally crept through the curtained windows. Morning had come, though the sun was only a pale smear behind the lingering fog. Ashwood Lane remained enshrouded, the world beyond still hidden from view. Exhausted and wired with adrenaline, the neighbours set about gathering supplies as planned. In twos and threes, they ventured to their homes to fetch what they could, making sure no one went anywhere alone. Every trip across a lawn or down the street felt perilous under the unmoving mist and unnatural quiet. By 8 a.m., a modest stockpile had accumulated in the Healy's living room. Jugs of water, canned food, a manual can opener, extra candles, batteries, which, for now, were useless, a first aid kit, and various tools. an axe, kitchen knives, a crowbar. Tom had also brought over his hunting bow and a quiver of arrows, along with a handgun from a locked case. The sight of the weapons made everyone uneasy, but Tom insisted it was just a precaution. Paula opened a can of peaches for people to share, her hands trembling. She wasn't alone. Everyone was on edge. Lack of sleep etched dark circles under eyes, and the oppressive aura of fear continued to gnaw at them. The Hales toddler started fussing again, crying inconsolably as the morning wore on. His thin cries frayed already raw nerves. Mrs. Alvarez whispered a prayer under her breath, while Susan Wilcox quietly sobbed into her palm, her husband Charlie rubbing her back absent-mindedly as he paced. Why haven't the authorities come yet? Charlie suddenly burst out, unable to contain himself. Surely someone noticed that light or our power going out. Why is no one here? His voice rose with each question. Maybe they can't see the fog from outside, Tom offered, though he didn't sound confident. It might not be affecting anyone else, Paula said, trying to sound reassuring. Maybe just us. If it's just us, then someone did this to us, Richard said, voice tight. The implication hung in the air. If they were targeted, why and by whom? Dan frowned as he adjusted the bandage on a blister he'd gotten while moving supplies. Look, we don't know anything for sure. Could be an accident or some kind of leak. An accident, Richard cut in, a tremor in his voice. A blinding light, all electronics dead, a fog that traps us here. This feels intentional. A heavy silence followed. Paula glanced at Lily, who sat drawing on some scrap paper at the dining table, trying to occupy herself. They had told Lily it was like a strange storm, and that everything would be fine. Paula wished she could believe it herself. On the paper, Lily had sketched a crude figure under a big yellow sun. Paula realized with a start that the figure had a frightening smile drawn on it, too many teeth in a grin that stretched ear to ear. Before she could ask about it, Dan came over and gently took the crayon from Lily's hand. "Hey, why don't you take a break, Lil?" Dan said softly. He was trying to keep Lily distracted and upbeat, but even he looked unnerved by the drawing. Maybe help Mom find some bowls for these peaches. Lily didn't protest. She slid off the chair and moved to Paula's side. Paula wrapped an arm around her. Suddenly, Karen Hale spoke up in a panicked tone. Do you all feel like we're being watched?" She was shaking, eyes unfocused. "I keep thinking I see someone outside the window. Like a shape." Immediately, half the room turned to look at the curtained windows. Nothing was visible beyond them except dim light. "It's the stress, Karen," Susan said gently. "We're all imagining things." "Maybe," Karen murmured, though she didn't sound convinced. Dan cleared his throat. "Why don't we all sit and talk this out? What do we know? The more we share observations, the better we might understand what's happening." It was a sensible suggestion. The neighbours settled in a loose circle amidst the clutter of supplies and flickering candles. "Okay," Dan began. "We know every electronic device stopped at 2:03 a.m., right after that flash. The fog rolled in right after. It's almost like a dome over us," Tom added, sealing us in. "Maybe it's military," Evan suggested quietly. "Like some quarantine or experiment?" At the word experiment, eyes went to Evan, then each other. The idea had crossed more than one mind in the room. Paula chewed her lip. "Unbeknownst to us? That would be insanely illegal." Richard let out a bitter laugh. "Illegal, so is abducting people, but maybe they don't care. Maybe we're guinea pigs for some new weapon." A grim silence fell as that sunk in. Charlie's gaze shifted to Dan. "You mentioned intentional earlier, Rich. If it is intentional, could one of us be involved? Or responsible somehow?" Dan blinked. "What? Charlie, come on." Charlie shrugged nervously. "I mean, what if someone here knew this would happen? Or what if someone here isn't who we think they are?" A chill settled over the group. "You're talking crazy now," Tom said, though his tone lacked conviction. Karen hugged her toddler tightly, eyes darting around. "Charlie, don't say that. We all know each other." "Do we?" Richard muttered. "I mean, how well do neighbours really know one another?" Paula felt Lily's hand clutch hers. "Stop it," she said firmly. "We can't start suspecting each other. We need to stick together." But the seed was planted. The neighbours avoided each other's eyes, each privately mulling the same dark thought. Just then, Lily tugged on Paula's shirt. "Mommy," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." "What is it, sweetie?" Paula asked, bending down. Lily glanced warily at the others and lowered her voice, though in the quiet room most could still hear. "Last night, I saw Daddy do something weird," Lily confessed, "when the lights were out." Paula felt her stomach drop. "What do you mean, weird?" All eyes turned to Lily now. Dan shifted uneasily. "Lily Bean, what are you talking about?" Lily swallowed, looking at her father almost apologetically. "It was when you and Mr. Charlie went to look at the back door, Daddy. It was dark, and you looked at me and your face glitched." Dan's brow furrowed. "My face what?" "Glitched," she repeated, the word coming out in a squeak. "Like on a video game when it bugs. Your eyes didn't look right, and you smiled at me, but you had too many teeth." A cold electric tension charged the room. Paula's mouth went dry. "Honey, you were very scared last night. It was dark. Maybe you just imagined." "I know what I saw," Lily cried, her voice high and desperate to be believed. Tears formed in her eyes. "It was just for a second, but I saw it. That wasn't Daddy. It looked like him, but it wasn't." Dan stood up, hands in the air as if surrendering. "Lily, sweetheart, you must have had a nightmare. I promise you I'm me. See?" He forced a smile, trying to appear gentle, but his own fear showed through. "Just your regular old dad. No glitches." Lily burst into tears, burying her face in Paula's side. Paula stroked her back at a loss for words. Her daughter's terror was unmistakable. A heavy silence fell. The neighbours watched Dan, their expressions shifting subtly. Doubt, fear, the very things they'd promised not to feel about each other were now tainting their faces. Richard broke the silence, voice low and tight. "Dan, you have to admit, that's disturbing." Dan's temper flared. "You're taking the word of a scared little girl over what you've known for years?" "You've known me, Richard, all of you have." Tom's jaw clenched. "No one is accusing you of anything, Dan, but Lily's scared and what?" Dan snapped, a vein in his neck visible. "You think I'm one of them now? Is that it? Some kind of pod person?" "Nobody said that," Charlie replied, though he avoided Dan's eyes. Susan's voice trembled as she chimed in. "This is getting out of hand. Maybe Lily just needs rest. We're all seeing things. Karen saw shapes, Richard heard voices, Lily saw whatever she saw. Whatever she saw looked like her father, Richard said, but maybe it wasn't." Paula felt a surge of anger. "Stop it, all of you. This paranoia, it's exactly what whoever they are, would want." She glared around the circle. "We are friends and neighbours. We can't turn on each other." A tense beat passed. Then Evan spoke up quietly, as if voicing what others would not. "In those alien invasion movies, the aliens always try to divide people, make them suspect each other." "Exactly," Paula said with relief, happy someone got it. But Evan continued softly, "And sometimes the aliens disguise themselves as humans." A cold finger of dread traced down Paula's spine. Dan stared at the teenager in disbelief. "Evan, you can't honestly think—" "I'm not saying I do," Evan blurted, reddening. "Just, it's crossed my mind. Everything happening, it feels like one of those movies. And Lily." He trailed off, eyes full of apology toward Dan. A terrible quiet took hold. Dan looked around the room at neighbours who suddenly felt like strangers. "I can't believe this," he said, voice hushed. "Are you all seriously considering that I might not be me? That I'm some imposter?" No one replied, but the silence was telling. Paula rose, still holding Lily, and positioned herself in front of Dan. "This has to stop. We're all exhausted and scared, and now we're turning our fear on the people we care about. Dan is my husband, Lily's father. He's not an alien or a shapeshifter or anything of the sort." Dan nodded fervently. "Thank you. For God's sake, guys, listen to her. Think of everything we've been through together as neighbours. Block parties, holidays. You've seen me mow my lawn 100 times. Does that sound like an alien invader to you?" Susan let out a brittle laugh. "Aliens probably don't mow lawns." Charlie shot her a look. Susan not helping. Tom rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Look, no one wants to believe anything crazy. But if one of us had been, I don't know, copied or something, how would we know?" A stunned hush. Tom was voicing the unthinkable. "You wouldn't know," Richard answered in a haunted tone. "They'd look and act just like the person until they slip up." "Slip up?" Karen echoed, rocking her toddler anxiously. "Like smiling wrong? Or talking in a strange voice?" Dan took a step back, jaw tight. "This is insane. I'm as human as you are, Richard. And you, Tom, and—" "How can we be sure?" Charlie said, quietly now. Dan threw up his hands in frustration. "What do you want me to do? A blood test. Shall I cut myself to prove I bleed red? No one responded, but their very hesitation was damning. Tom swallowed hard. Maybe just until we figure this out. Maybe we should restrain anyone we're not sure about. Paula's eyes went wide. Tom Kendrick, you are not tying up my husband. It would only be temporary, Tom said, pained. He looked at Dan almost apologetically. Just until help comes or this fog lifts, to make sure everyone's safe. You mean to make sure you're safe from me, Dan said bitterly. Richard had already moved to the pile of supplies, rooting around. He came up with a long coil of clothesline rope. It's for the best, Dan. We can't risk it. Lily began to sob again. No, don't tie up Daddy. Paula's temper snapped. Put that rope down, Richard. All of you, listen to yourselves. Susan dabbed her eyes. Paula, we're scared, if there's even a chance. There isn't, Paula snarled. There is no chance because it's not true. Dan is Dan. Dan squared his shoulders. If you try to tie me up like some animal, we're going to have a real problem. Tension crackled. Tom's hand drifted toward the pistol holstered at his hip. Nobody wants a problem, Dan. We're trying to protect all of us, including your family. If you're really you, you'll cooperate until this blows over. Paula saw Dan's eyes flick to the gun, and a mix of fury and fear crossed his face. He met Tom's gaze. You're going to hold me at gunpoint now, old friend? Tom's face twisted with conflict, sweat beaded on his brow. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Dan's nostrils flared. You know what? Fine. You want to tie me up? Do it. When this is over, I'll have the pleasure of watching each of you beg for my forgiveness. He stepped forward, turning his back and extending his wrists in a show of angry compliance. Go on. Tie your neighbour up. For a moment, no one moved. They hadn't expected him to acquiesce. Charlie hesitated, rope in hand. Just around your middle to keep your arms in place. And to the radiator, so you can't move too much. Dan's laugh was hollow. Whatever makes you feel safe, Charlie. Paula placed Lily down and marched up to Charlie. If you do this, you'll never forgive yourself, she hissed, teeth clenched. Charlie avoided her eyes. With trembling hands, he began winding the clothesline around Dan's chest and arms, binding them to his sides. Dan stood rigid, face burning with humiliation and rage. When Charlie guided him a few steps over and tied the end of the rope to the cast-iron radiator pipe, Dan didn't resist. Lily ran to him, hugging his leg. Daddy, I'm sorry, she wailed. I didn't mean it. Dan forced a tight smile and ruffled her hair with his bound hand. It's okay, Pumpkin. None of this is your fault. Daddy's just playing a game with the neighbours for a bit. His reassuring words only made Paula's heart break more. She rounded on the others. Happy now? He's tied up. Are we all feeling safe? No one answered directly. Tom cleared his throat. It's just for now, just until we know what's going on. Dan sat on the floor against the wall, ropes cutting into him, and glowered at the group. Now that I'm a prisoner, what's next? You interrogate me, or maybe examine me? He lifted his chin defiantly. Go on, ask whatever you want. A few neighbours looked ashamed, but Richard met Dan's gaze coldly. If you're not one of them, you've got nothing to worry about. Paula scoffed. And what if something else weird happens? Who's next on your witch hunt list? Me? One of the kids? She picked Lily up, holding her tightly as the girl sobbed into her shoulder. Tom rubbed his injured arm where the rope had given him a friction burn while tying Dan. Nobody else is next. Let's just all take a breath and calm down. Calm was a long way off, but with Dan restrained and glowering and Lily crying softly, a lull settled over the house. The neighbours broke away into smaller, uneasy clusters, some by the windows, others by the kitchen, each processing what they'd just done. Paula stayed by Dan's side, refusing to leave him. She dabbed the sweat from his brow with a dish towel and murmured comforting words to Lily, who refused to let go of her father's leg. Dan remained tensely silent, fury radiating off him. Ashwood Lane's tight-knit community had reached a terrifying tipping point. In the span of a few hours, trust had shattered into pieces, and the day was just beginning. Miles away, in a secret military control bunker, a cluster of anxious technicians watched the nightmare on Ashwood Lane unfold via thermal imaging and biometric scanners. Operation Icarus, their experimental neural weapon test, had misfired catastrophically. Instead of a controlled trial in an isolated area, the device's blinding pulse had hit an unsuspecting neighbourhood. Can't we shut it down? a technician pleaded as she frantically entered override codes. The console flashed red. No response. The prototype transmitter on Ashwood Lane was stuck on full power, flooding innocent people's minds with fear and hallucinations. They saw neighbours turning on each other in real time, heart rates spiking on monitors. "Oh my God," someone whispered as a muzzle flash lit up one screen. A man was down. Chaos was spreading like fire. "We have to intervene," snapped the control team leader. But entering the fog-shrouded test zone before the device's field died risked exposing their own team to the same mind-warping signals. Protocol demanded they wait it out. All they could do was watch in horror and hope the transmitter's battery, set to run out within a few hours, would drain before the residents destroyed one another completely. It didn't take long for the uneasy lull to shatter. Maybe half an hour had passed since Dan was restrained. Most of the group sat in brooding silence or paced in separate rooms, avoiding eye contact. Fear and guilt hung heavy in the air. Richard Hale couldn't stop staring at Dan, who remained bound to the radiator. To Richard's eyes, Dan's every breath, each shift of his eyes, was suspect, evidence of something other hiding beneath his skin. The voice that had whispered Richard's name from the fog, could it have been this thing, wearing Dan's face, trying to lure him out? The thought festered in Richard's mind, growing more certain by the minute. Finally, Richard stood up, jaw clenched. Without a word, he went to the kitchen and opened a drawer. When he turned back, a long steel kitchen knife glinted in his hand. Paula saw him first. She rose from Dan's side, instantly alarmed. "Richard, what are you doing with that?" All conversation stopped. Tom tensed, one hand drifting toward his holstered gun. Evan pressed back against the wall. Richard's eyes looked almost feverish. "We need to be sure," he said, voice taut. "Talking won't prove anything." He took a step toward Dan, knife in hand. Dan's eyes widened. "Oh, hell no." He started straining against his bonds. "Richard, put that down," Tom warned, moving between him and Dan. "This has gone far enough." Richard's face was slicked with sweat. "Has it? We've all felt something messing with us. How do we know it's not him doing it?" He jabbed the knife vaguely in Dan's direction. "Maybe he's sending signals to our heads, making us see things." Paula planted herself in Richard's path, her heart hammering. "Listen to yourself. Dan is tied up. He can't possibly hurt anyone." Richard's hands shook, but he didn't lower the blade. "Maybe that's what it wants us to think. Maybe it's still controlling." "Richard," Paula said, struggling to keep calm, "I know you're scared. We all are. But you're about to do something terrible." Behind Paula, Dan spoke up, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Go on then, Rich. Cut me. Let's see my alien blood, shall we?" "Dan, stop," Tom snapped, fearing antagonizing Richard further. Richard's eyes darted between Dan and Paula. Finally, he seemed to steel himself. "Just a small cut," he muttered, "to see the blood. That's all. Then we'll know." Before Paula could react, he lunged around her. She grabbed at his arm, but Richard shoved her aside with surprising force. Paula fell hard, her head cracking against the side of the coffee table. Stars burst in her vision as she hit the floor. Lily screamed as she watched her mother go down. "Mommy!" In that same instant, Richard reached Dan. Dan kicked out, but Richard managed to grab his bound arm and drag the knife across Dan's forearm in one swift motion. Dan yelled in pain. A bright line of red immediately bloomed on his skin, blood welling up and trickling down to his elbow. For a moment, everyone froze. Dan stared at his own bleeding arm in shock and fury. Richard, too, gaped at the crimson trail. Red blood. Human blood. "You stupid son of a!" Dan snarled. He lunged forward despite the ropes, managing to shove Richard backward a step. "Richard, stop now!" Tom shouted, rushing over. He grabbed Richard by the shoulders, trying to yank him away from Dan. Richard's face crumpled with confusion, almost despair. "It's a trick," he stammered. "They bleed like us. It has to be a trick." Paula, dazed from her fall, pushed herself up and saw blood streaming from Dan's arm. White-hot anger flared in her. Without thinking, she snatched up the heavy glass lantern from the floor, Mrs. Alvarez's, left near the radiator, and smashed it against the side of Richard's head. The glass shattered with a dull thunk. Richard stumbled, the knife slipping from his grasp to clatter on the floor. He turned toward Paula, eyes wide with shock and a trickle of blood now running down the side of his face. "You!" he hissed, raising a hand to the gash on his temple. "Bitch!" He lurched toward Paula. murder in his eyes. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Paula flinched, expecting to feel a bullet tear into her, but it was Richard who stopped dead in his tracks. A red stain spread rapidly across the centre of his shirt. Behind him, Tom stood with his pistol raised, both hands on the grip. Smoke curled from the barrel. Richard's mouth opened as if to speak, but only a faint cough came out, accompanied by a gout of blood on his lips. His knees buckled, and he collapsed face down on the rug without another sound. The echo of the gunshot hung in the air. Lily was screaming shrilly. Karen clutched her toddler, eyes huge over the child's head. Even Evan looked stunned by what his father had done. Tom's gun wavered in his hands. He was going to kill her, he rasped, perhaps to himself. I had to. Paula's ears rang. She crawled to Dan, who was gasping, pale-faced from shock and pain. Blood from his arm dripped to the floor in a steady patter. Lily flung herself onto Dan, sobbing hysterically. It's okay, baby. Daddy's okay. Dan managed through gritted teeth, though he was anything but. Charlie knelt beside Richard's motionless body, 2 fingers on his neck. He's dead, Charlie whispered, voice cracking. A collective shudder passed through the room. Suddenly, a distorted metallic screech sounded from outside, a warbling, high-pitched noise that rose and fell rapidly. The fog? A machine. It almost sounded like an alarm, but alien and wrong. Mrs. Alvarez clamped her hands over her ears. Madre de Dios, what is that? In truth, it was the Icarus transmitter on its last power surge, but none of them knew that. To the residents of Ashwood Lane, it was the shriek of something monstrous just beyond the fog. Susan's composure snapped. She began to sob uncontrollably, rocking in place on the sofa. Karen's toddler wailed in renewed fear. Charlie stumbled back from Richard's corpse, wild-eyed. It's them, he babbled. The things in the fog. They know we figured one out, so they're signalling. They're coming. No one is coming, Tom barked, but panic was overtaking even him. The surreal screeching outside finally faded, yet its echo seemed lodged in all their heads. Paula tore a strip from the bottom of her shirt and wrapped it tightly around Dan's bleeding forearm, trying to staunch the flow. Stay with me, Dan, she urged, her hands shaking violently. Dan's face was ashen. He had lost more blood than she liked. At the edge of her vision, Paula saw movement, Charlie picking something up. Richard's fallen knife. He rose, gripping it, and turned to face Dan once more. There was a peculiar light in Charlie's eyes now, a fanatic gleam. This thing did all this, Charlie growled, advancing toward the wounded, tired man on the floor. It turned us on each other. It made Richard go crazy. Tom, still holding the pistol, stepped in Charlie's path. Charlie put the knife down. Charlie's face twisted into a snarl. Get out of my way, Tom. You saw what happened. How do we know it didn't control Paula too? Made her hit Richard to protect itself. Paula felt a stab of fear. Charlie had completely lost it. From the floor, Dan looked up, weak and furious. You really want to do this, Charlie? Go ahead, kill me. Then when I turn out to be human, you'll have that on your conscience, if you even have one left. Charlie flinched, but he didn't lower the blade. Shut up, he snapped. You're trying to confuse us. Evan suddenly stepped between his father and Charlie, arms outstretched. Mr. Charlie, please, no more. Charlie's gaze softened for just a moment as he regarded the teen. Evan, move aside. I don't want to hurt you. Behind Charlie, Susan cried, Charlie, stop! But he was past hearing. Tom grabbed Charlie's wrist that held the knife. Charlie, don't do this. We've shed enough blood. Charlie let out an anguished yell and, with a burst of frantic strength, shoved Tom backwards. Tom's back struck the wall hard, knocking a framed photo to the ground with a crash. The pistol flew from his hand, skidding across the hardwood floor toward the kitchen. Now free, Charlie advanced on Dan, knife raised. Paula threw herself over her husband and daughter, shielding them with her body. No, please. A pair of arms wrapped around Charlie from behind. It was Evan, desperately trying to wrestle him back. Dad, the boy cried out, appealing to Tom for help. Tom shook off his daze and launched himself at Charlie as well. He grabbed Charlie's knife arm while Evan clung to Charlie's waist. Charlie roared in frustration, thrashing violently. In the melee, no one saw Susan run out of the room. Paula scrambled away, pulling Lily with her out of harm's reach. She watched, horror-stricken, as Tom and Evan struggled against Charlie's fury. The knife slashed wildly and caught Tom's forearm. Tom hissed in pain but held on. With his other hand, he punched Charlie hard in the jaw. Charlie staggered, dazed by the blow. For a heartbeat, the fight paused, until Charlie's eyes landed on the pistol lying near the kitchen doorway. Breaking free of Evan's weakening grip, Charlie dove for the gun, snatching it off the floor. He spun around, pistol in hand, backing up toward the front door. Now he was the one holding everyone at bay. Tom froze, cradling his bleeding arm. Evan retreated to his father's side, shaking. Paula and Lily crouched by the couch, watching with terrified eyes. Charlie's chest heaved. He looked utterly lost, cornered by phantom enemies. His finger tightened on the trigger, the gun aimed wildly between Tom and Dan and Paula, as if unsure who to shoot first. A deafening blast split the air. Charlie jerked forward, a red hole suddenly gaping in the center of his back. The gun slipped from his fingers as he crumpled to the floor, face down beside Richard's body. Behind him, in the open doorway, Susan Wilcox stood holding Tom's 12-gauge hunting shotgun. Her face was a mask of grief and resolve. She'd run home to fetch it when the fighting began, and now smoke wafted from its barrel. "Charlie!" Susan screamed, dropping the shotgun with a clatter and rushing to her husband's side. But Charlie was gone, eyes staring blankly as Susan turned him over and cradled him, sobbing hysterically. The recoil of the shotgun had knocked the petite woman against the doorframe, and she sported a bruising cheek, but she didn't care. Oh, God, what did I do? Charlie, I'm sorry. No one spoke. The living room was a scene from hell. 2 bodies lay on the bloody floor, Richard and Charlie. Dan remained bound and wounded, barely conscious now from blood loss. Tom leaned against the wall, pressing a dish towel to the gash on his arm, eyes unfocused in shock. Evan hovered protectively next to him, tears streaming silently down his face. Paula knelt with Lily in her arms, both crying softly. Karen sat on the floor with her toddler clutched to her chest, rocking and murmuring a wordless keen. Tom's lips suddenly peeled back in a grotesque grin, and a strange sound bubbled up from his throat, a high, thin giggle. It grew louder, a horrible, keening laugh that echoed off the blood-spattered walls. Evan looked at his father, alarmed. "Dad!" Tom slid down to sit on the floor, back against the wall, and cackled like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Tears mingled with the laughter, turning it to sobs that then circled back to laughter. The sound was raw and unhinged. "That's enough, Tom," Paula whispered, wiping her face with a trembling hand. But Tom couldn't stop. Hysteria had him in its grip. Susan's sobs over Charlie's body grew softer, turning into a numb silence as she simply rocked his corpse. Paula realized with numbing clarity that none of them were okay. They were broken, each and every one. Fear had driven them past the brink of madness, and there was no coming back. Dan slumped against the radiator, eyes half-lidded. Paula crawled to him and pressed her fingers to his neck. A pulse, faint but there. She tore another strip from her shirt hem and tightened the makeshift bandage on his shoulder wound. If help didn't come soon, he'd bleed out. But who was left to help? Through the broken front door, the fog still loomed outside, though it seemed to be thinning just slightly. Sunlight was trying to break through, shafts of wan light piercing the gloom. Paula looked around at her neighbours, friends, reduced to this. The floor was sticky with blood. The air stank of gunpowder, iron and sweat. They had barricaded themselves in a nightmare of their own making. Ashwood Lane had descended into hell. As the long day dragged on into afternoon, what remained of the neighbourhood fell deathly quiet. Those who survived the carnage retreated to separate corners, tending wounds or simply curling into numb balls of shock. No one spoke. There were no more accusations, no more fights left in them, only emptiness and horror. Unseen by the traumatized survivors, the small transmitter device at the center of the cul-de-sac finally flickered off as its battery died. The wall of fog that had isolated Ashwood began to dissipate, lifting slowly like a curtain on a stage of atrocities. But by then, the people of Ashwood Lane no longer needed any external force to make them see monsters. The monsters were in their heads and among them on the floor. They were themselves. They had become what they feared, and there was no one left to tell them it had all been a terrible mistake. 2 days later, the summer sun finally pierced through a lingering haze above Ashwood Lane. The fog was gone, leaving a seemingly quiet suburban street under a bright blue sky. To an outsider driving in, The neat lawns and tidy houses might have looked almost normal, if not for the eerie stillness and the absence of any residents in sight. A convoy of unmarked black vehicles rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac. Armed personnel in tactical gear and hazmat suits poured out, fanning across the neighborhood with practiced efficiency. These were the recovery and containment teams, dispatched under the guise of responding to a gas leak. What they found behind the doors of Ashwood Lane would haunt even the most hardened among them. Sergeant Michael Harper led one entry team to the Healy house, the epicenter of the incident, according to thermal scans and drone surveillance. The front door was ajar, a trail of dried blood smeared on the threshold. Stepping cautiously inside, Harper's boot nearly slipped in a pool of congealed blood on the hardwood floor. He grimaced beneath his respirator. "Clear, moving in," one of his men whispered, sweeping a flashlight across the dim interior. The electricity was still out, leaving the house in tomb-like gloom. The beam found the first body, Richard Hale, sprawled on the living room rug, a dark, flaking halo staining the floor around him. A few feet away lay another corpse, male, face down with a gaping wound in his back, Charlie Wilcox. "Jesus!" one of the soldiers breathed, the words soft with dread. They pressed on. On the sofa, a woman sat upright, staring blankly ahead. It was Susan Wilcox. She didn't react to the intrusion at all. Her eyes were fixed on nothing, her face wet with tears long shed. In her lap, she held one of Charlie's cold, bloodied hands, gripping it tightly. A medic gently touched Susan's shoulder. "Ma'am." Susan blinked once, as if coming out of a daze. She allowed them to ease her up from the couch. As they led her out, she kept her gaze over her shoulder, locked on her husband's body until it vanished from sight. Not a word escaped her lips. In a corner, slumped against the wall, Tom Kendrick sat with his injured arm crusted in dried blood. His teenage son Evan knelt beside him. Both stared vacantly into space, unresponsive even when soldiers carefully removed the blood-stained towel from Tom's wound and helped them to their feet. The two moved mechanically, following orders in mute silence. Near an overturned coffee table, they found Paula Healy. She was semi-conscious, lying on her side with a swollen knot on her temple. When a medic gently roused her, Paula woke with a jolt. Her eyes darted around wildly, taking in the strangers in hazmat suits. "No, get away!" she screamed, scrambling back on hands and heels until she hit the wall. In her delirium, perhaps she mistook the suited figures for another hallucination. "It's all right, ma'am," the medic soothed, raising empty hands. "We're here to help." Paula's gaze landed on Dan's lifeless body still bound to the radiator beside her, and a wail of pure despair tore from her throat. She crawled to her husband's corpse, which had been cold for over a day now, and wrapped her arms around him. "Please," she sobbed, rocking over Dan's rope-encircled torso. "Please, no." They had to sedate her to pry her from Dan's body. Even under sedation, Paula kept murmuring his name over and over. Sergeant Harper swallowed the lump in his throat and moved deeper into the house. By the cold fireplace, the recovery team found an older woman, Karen Hale, huddled on the floor with a toddler clutched to her chest. Both were alive. The child was whimpering softly, dehydrated but otherwise unharmed. Karen's face was blank, tear tracks staining her cheeks. She offered no resistance as a female officer carefully lifted the crying toddler from her arms. Karen simply stayed in that same fetal sit, now holding nothing, her empty hands still rocking an invisible child. Upstairs, a few team members discovered Lily Healy hiding in a wardrobe, clutching a stuffed rabbit. The little girl was unresponsive, awake but staring through them. When gently pulled out, she made no sound, her eyes vacant and doll-like. She had a crayon drawing clutched in her fist, creased and stained with blood. One of the medics pried it loose to find it depicted a stick-figure man with an impossibly wide smile full of teeth. The medic exchanged a haunted look with Harper. In total, the teams found numerous dead bodies and the remaining survivors in states of catatonic shock. The living were quickly moved out to waiting ambulances, some screaming, some silent, all broken. Meanwhile, technicians located the strange transmitter device standing on the grass in the middle of the cul-de-sac. It resembled some sort of metal suitcase on spindly legs, with antennas jutting out. Now inert, its lights off, it gave no clues to the nightmare it had unleashed. The techs secured it in a lead-lined container for transport. By afternoon, Ashwood Lane was swarmed by clean-up crews photographing and cataloguing the destruction. Blood spatter on walls, bullet holes, shattered glass, all recorded in meticulous detail before being sanitized. A door was found with "Not Human" scrawled in dried blood, stark evidence of the hysteria that had ruled the final hours. Sergeant Harper stepped out into the cul-de-sac, pulling off his respirator to gulp in fresh air. The sun was high and brutal, revealing the drawn faces of his fellow responders. No one spoke. What could be said? They had seen what ordinarily kind people had done to each other in the span of a couple of days. It was as gut-wrenching as any war zone Harper had ever been in. Nearby, a woman in a lab coat, Dr. Elaine Vickers, stood overseeing the sealing of the transmitter's container. She was pale and shaking, tears streaking her cheeks. Harper recognized guilt when he saw it. She looked like a woman damned by her own hand. As the container lid shut with a heavy clang, Vickers whispered to no one in particular, "We flew too high." Within the hour, the last of the vans departed Ashwood Lane, carrying away survivors to secret facilities where they would receive treatment, and where their horrific stories would be swallowed by official denial and silence. The bodies were zipped into black bags, destined for quiet autopsies and classified reports. Ashwood Lane was left utterly still. The blood had been scrubbed from the pavement, the broken glass swept. But the silence itself felt stained by what had happened. In time, the neighborhood would be repopulated, houses rebuilt or sold. New families would move in, blissfully unaware of the unspeakable tragedy that had occurred under their roofs. They'd see the odd scuff on a baseboard or a discoloured patch on hardwood and never know it was a bullet's path or a bloodstain's echo. But for those who knew, the shadows of Operation Icarus, the Ashwood Lane incident, would forever linger. It stood as a silent testament to how fragile the veneer of civilization truly is, how in the absence of light and reason, fear can make monsters of the most ordinary people. In the end, there were no aliens, no demons, no invaders had descended on Ashwood Lane that night. Only fear. Fear which turned neighbour against neighbour, friend into foe. Only the monsters that fear had made of them all.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.